Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Christopher Sanchez, your favorite Chicano in politics. We're recording another episode for the Mesa Verdes podcast. Joining us today is none other than Juan Altamirano from the Trust for Public Land.
Hello, hello.
Carol Gonzalez, your Latina advocate.
Hi.
And today joining us in the group is Maria Morales with Hispanas Organized for Political Equality, also known as HOPE.
Awesome. Hi.
So, Maria, before we get into it and start our conversation, tell us a little bit more about your organization and what you all do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to join on this podcast. I feel like I've just been seeing all the recordings on TikTok, so I'm very honored. HOPE is an organization. We're based out of LA, but we're statewide, that's focused on building political and economic parity for Latinas. And so we do that through what most people think about us is our leadership initiatives. So we have, adult leadership programs, youth leadership programs focused on empowering our local leaders. And then we do that through advocacy, which is kind of where I step in. So we have, bills that we champion. We elevate, opportunities for our women to be more civically engaged as a means to build kind of political and economic parity. But it's all focused on kind of, building partnerships with our Latinas who we know are ready and willing to serve their communities.
That's amazing. It's a lot of great work that you all been doing, a lot of amazing reports that you've all published. If you haven't, make sure to check out HOPE. And if you're not a HOPE sister yet, you should look into it and make sure that you sign up to be part of their cohort.
You just made it a lot more competitive.
Oh, yeah, we love having people in our HOPE Latinas network.
Let's go.
I know we have one in the room with us, Carol, who just did the cohort last year.
Proud alum.
Right.
And you can check us out. Our website is latinas.org. We worked hard for that domain.
That's
so,
right.
Feel free to use it.
It's like the Harvard of Latina advocacy.
Ooh, I like that. I'm going to incorporate that into our talking points, It's funny. I feel like some people fight to get this like honorary HOPE Latina status, or they see me and they're like, oh, HOPE Latina is hard at work. And I'm like, okay, I appreciate that that's part of our brand.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, a lot's been going on in politics, at the federal level, but in California. And speaking of the federal level, we had some visitors come to California from the federal government. Bernie Sanders and AOC were in California. They stopped in Los Angeles. They came to Folsom. Did any of you all go to Folsom, to the Folsom rally by any chance?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
Maria
me too.
Did.
Yeah. It was crazy. There were so many people there. I didn't even realize how many people there were until I saw the reel that was posted after the fact, like from the bird's eye view. It was crazy.
It was. We walked like 2 miles to be able to get parking and make it into the venue. It was pretty insane. Yeah.
Dang. Was there like anything that you took away from it that really resonated with you? Like, did their presence really matter to you? Like, they're here and I'm listening, but they're also here because I'm, that there was a reason why they're here. And did any of that sink in, or was there any message that you took away?
I mean, I think for me, it was just a reminder that there's, I think, an eagerness for community building and like spaces like that. I think when I saw that they were going to be in Folsom, I was like, this is so random. And I'm like, but I also understand their kind of like larger message and strategy around kind of where they're going. But I think just looking around the room, a lot of people were excited. I think where I was standing, you couldn't even see the speakers. You could just hear them, but there were people who were still excited. I mean, I was still excited, and I think it was just about being there and being in community and feeling like, something's being done, which I think was exciting.
I was actually surprised by the folks who were there. There was a lot of white people, a lot of older people, and I think the common thread was that they're scared about what's happening with Social Security, what's going to happen to, a lot of the supports that they rely on, like Medicaid, Medi-Cal, all those support programs that they're hoping to rely on. And so I was surprised by the crowd. I expected to see a lot more youth there, I'm not going to lie. And I felt like there's an absence there that I don't know why or what's keeping them. I mean, I was reflecting on, Bernie rallies from back in the day. I remember going to one of the first Bernie rallies back in like 2015, and there was a lot of youth there. And, over time, I remember being in college, working 2 jobs, whatever, but I'd make that shit work, Oops, am I not supposed to cuss?
Hey, this is not public radio. Go ahead.
You're passionate. We're here.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Yeah, but, like, now with like folks having maybe like 3 jobs, whatever that might be, I don't know what's keeping our youth from showing up or showing out. But, I think we talked about that in a previous podcast about, them being the voice and the leaders in a lot of the work that we do. But I was surprised. I expected to see more. I don't know if you caught that too, Maria, but, the crowd wasn't as, youthful as I thought it would be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. From where I was sitting next to all teenagers, actually.
Oh, okay.
But we were all
well,
in the
that's
back.
good. I'm glad.
But I do hear what you're saying. I think that's actually been part of the work that we've been doing is, like, how do we, reinstill or at least, like, foster that, like, civic engagement feel in our youth. We have a college leadership program, and we did a little, as part of our programming, we just have a discussion on, like, the issues that they care about. And I think, there's a passion for serving their communities, but I also feel like there's this, like, larger disappointment in the state of the world and, like, how we're leaving it for them, So I feel like a lot of the work that we're thinking is, like, how are we supporting our youth so that they feel empowered to join these rallies, or they feel like it's, working towards something and not just, like, performative, because I think that's what I feel like a lot of youth think.
And that's very comforting to know that you're sitting next to a bunch of teenagers, because for a minute there I was sweating, thinking that Carol was calling us old and be like, yeah, I used to go to all these rallies. And be like, I remember when Bernie was young and but I mean, think about it, right? Like, one thing that a lot of folks are talking about is, like, what are the Dems doing? And is AOC still relevant to this new generation? To us, absolutely she is. And I want to listen to everything she got to say. Bernie, same thing. But, like, is the Dem party missing something? But yeah, so just FYI, Juan, I'm not calling you old, but
I am old, and also, I mean, I think one of the things that I appreciated, even though I wasn't there, but I've seen stories and about these rallies, right, is that people are starting to organize, and people, to what you're saying, Carol, is people are energized. They want to see something. They want to hear from people who are opposed to a lot of what's going on at the federal government. And I think there's a yearning from the public to see public officials or leaders stand up and have a bigger voice for people to fight against what's going on. And so I think there's a lot of people who are terrified at what's going on, but there's also hope. And what those rallies have brought forward is the hope that I think that the country and many people, millions of Americans have, and that we could see something better. It doesn't have to be like this. And it's just 4 months into an administration. Yeah. It can be different, and so I think people are yearning for that hope.
And I also think it was strategic, right? When you said why Folsom, I don't know. It's Kevin Kiley's seat, I feel like folks are trying to see what member they could peel off on some of the votes that they have to take, because members and community members will realize, like, yeah, we can flip this seat if we need to, because there are a lot of folks who are depending on those critical votes. And then the last thing I'll say on this is, I think AOC and Bernie, they did a really good job of highlighting this isn't a partisan issue. Like, it's not Democrats only who care about these issues, not Republicans only who care about these issues, or independents. And they're really trying to find a way, like, how do we bring people in together to realize this shouldn't be a partisan issue, when you're dealing with basic rights.
Yeah. I think just to add to that briefly, because Hope is a nonpartisan organization, so I'll caveat that. But I think the the partnership between AOC, who is this, like, Latina icon, I think that a lot of, like, our young women identify with, right? And pairing with Bernie, who has had this kind of, like, larger movement that has, like, in many ways radicalized our youth. I think it's interesting to see the potential of that, and I'll be curious to see how it kind of continues to evolve.
No, absolutely. And so, we know a lot of people listen to our podcast. Newsom, for example, he listened to it, and he has his own podcast. So, Bernie, AOC, if you're listening, we'll invite you again. This time you come to Sacramento. But taking a step out real quick, that was some of the local news, but we want to look and go into some binational news. But it also kind of hits home. There's a lot happening when it comes to corridos and Mexican music. For those that don't know, the president of Mexico has just launched a campaign to promote nonviolent corridos, and some people are like, "Is that possible?" And they start looking at their playlist and are saying, "Oh, well, yeah, a lot of the ones that I listen to kind of fit in that category." But she's not prohibiting the language. She's just promoting, creating a competition actually about alternative ways to sing corridos. I'm not sure. Have you all heard about it? What are your thoughts? And then it's related to us in many ways because of the population in California and some federal stuff as well. But let's dive into what's happening in Mexico first.
I'll just say that that corridos have been around for a really long time, over 200, 300 years. And the history of the corridos is taking a story of especially under marginalized communities to really create and tell a story about who and why are they being marginalized, right? And so the history of the corrido is one of the most magical things that we have in not folklore, but like being able to talk about this, about issues that are plaguing society. And in the 30s, La Adelita was probably one of the most famous corridos that started in telling the story about the Mexican revolutionary women fighting in the Mexican Revolution. And from there on, it just continued to be corridos, folky tales of what's happening in that time and era. So to me, corridos, wonderful, right? I think that the turn especially in the 1980s of corridos started kind of with Los Tigres del Norte, right? When they started talking about, narcoita. I can't remember what the title is. Let me see if I can pull it up here. But it's like, let's see. Contrabando y traición, right? And they tell this story about a drug deal gone wrong between the folks, and it's probably one of the most famous hits in the 1980s. From there on, you start seeing a lot of these, more formally known as narco corridos, not as violent as they are now, right? But to the overall point, I don't see the corridos or narco corridos as a problem in itself. It's the violence itself, right? And the violence is not caused by music. It's not caused by media. It's not none of that. It is the accessible, the easy access to weapons in Mexico, especially, right? And Mexico has a ban on having weapons as individuals. So one of the questions that I ask is, where are these weapons coming from, right? And probably 80 to 90% of the weapons found in massacres and the drug cartel violence is weapons that are coming from the U.S. And currently there is a lawsuit that the country of Mexico is having against the United States for the influx of weapons and semi-automatic weapons into the country. So to me, it's the weapons and not necessarily the narco corridos.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate all that context. And I have to agree. I feel like in my mind, corridos have always been like a form of like people's journalism, right? Like they're storytelling avenues to talk about things like migration, injustice, love. And yeah, sometimes they talk about violence. But I think, Juan, to your point, right, like these songs sometimes these songs reflect conditions on the ground. They're not necessarily encouraging them. They're just an avenue through which artists can speak to what they're seeing, right? And in many ways, like our community resonates with that because that's their reality. I think the campaign that is being promoted by the president, I think, is an interesting one. I don't condone violence, but I also feel like music has always been a safe space for free expression. You know, I grew up playing instruments. Like, it's always been kind of a safe space for me to just listen and be in that zone. So I just also wonder, like, as a moment, what does this mean for censorship and for, you know, even other genres outside of corridos that also speak to some of these, like, kind of more structural themes that reflect things that our communities are feeling here across the border, you know, in Mexico, wherever that might be.
So what you're saying is that you feel attacked.
Personally, actually.
You're like, I'm a musician.
As a musician, because I played in like 5th grade.
Yeah, I feel like I love what you both shared, and I think just adding on to that is it's nothing really new. AMLO was like hugs, not bullets, or whatever, something like that. And so I think the president is kind of following in those footsteps, but I think it does go back to limiting what folks can and can't talk about or share. It's not that much more different when you think about rap, right? Like, folks are talking about very similar things than narco corridos too. But I think it's kind of highlights the tension maybe between the country politics and, you know, what could happen in the future on all things we've already shared related to guns, policy. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a very equivalent to here in the United States, the censorship of gangster rap, right? With, I believe, Reagan attempted to do that and censor rap and have that. What was a sticker that was on the parent advisory guidance or something like that? And when they tried to do that and slap on that label onto the CDs or tapes or whatever it is that they were using, that attracted more enthusiasm for youth or the folks who were, looking at consuming that product. It enticed them to buy them, right? And so it's no different in my mind. And if anything, it entices more of that consumption of that type of media and that type of genre that they're seeking. Eazy-E was like the one of the examples, right? That President Reagan was trying to use as a foil to say, you don't want to be like this guy. And to me, that just he became even more popular. They gave him the platform to become bigger than life and representative of the struggle and the movement. And so, if anything, it's gonna backfire, I think. But you're right. For me, you can't shut down freedom of expression, freedom of thought, and once you start going down that route, you start pulling at the fabric of what is society.
And well, fortunately, music doesn't have any borders. Mexican music is transnational. There's corrido singers in Mexico, but there's corrido singers here in the United States, in California, and
in Japan.
And in Japan, that's a whole different podcast, bro. Okay, we're just trying to get United States and Mexico down first. Okay, not even trying to throw in the international waters, but. And this kind of goes into the politics. So the government of Mexico feels a certain way about corridos or certain types of corridos. And then at the same time, right around the same time that the president had launched her campaign, the U.S. Government had revoked visas of corrido singers who were supposed to come on tour over here. And it's like, okay, but that's those corrido singers who are in the interior of Mexico. You can't revoke visas for individuals that are here and live here and are from Texas or from California and sing the same songs. And some of it is not about narco corridos in Mexico, but some of it's the same thing, just put a context of California or Los Angeles and so forth. So yeah, it's kind of interesting all what's happening at the same time on that.
Yeah, no, that's probably the scariest part of, as it relates to where we are in current times in the federal government targeting not just singers, right? And despite what they're saying, but the population who listens to them. And somehow that's become, a target of this administration simply because of affiliation or appearance, supposed affiliation, right? That they're targeting people just because they can, and that's both scary and also unfair and unjust. Typically folks that are like, oh, this is not who we are, but it kind of is. In some ways, we're just seeing the actual personalization come to life in the federal government of targeting people.
Yeah, and I think we can go down a rabbit hole on that one. Just because, that even leads into our own fears of going into our communities just because we look a certain way, right? We have citizens now being detained as they're traveling. Okay, that's also not related to corrido talk, but you know what I mean? I think there's really this political, larger international conversation going on about why the president might be wanting to push for this internally.
No, but I think you're right. I think all of these themes, what I hope people will get from it is that they'll understand the power of the government or the role that government has. Because I think, growing up, I think we all know somebody who was like, oh, I don't really care about politics, or I'm not involved in politics. And I think oftentimes we get so caught up in the partisan conversations that we don't really think about the impact of policy decisions and what that is translating to, right? This, what potential censorship means, or what an executive order to, take away visas looks like, right? And the direct impact that has on livelihoods. So I don't know. I guess I try and keep myself sane with the reality that hopefully people are talking about this, and that makes people feel differently about kind of how they activate around things that they care about,
And so I think the real question is, what are some of your favorite corridos? What corridos would you miss, or what corridos would you listen to now that if you couldn't hear any of those old corridos that were there before?
Does Peso Pluma count?
He does.
He is a corrido singer, right?
He does.
Yeah.
I don't listen to a lot of the new stuff very much.
It's because Juan's old.
Because I'm old. It is because I am old.
Juan
Again, exactly. And I accept it, I embrace it, and I know who I am. But yeah, no, I like the old school ones. I like Chalino Sanchez, Los Tigres del Norte, Los Cadetes Linares, even though it's not so quite narco corrido, right? But definitely had a tinge of some of that stuff. So for me, it's old school corridos.
Yeah, I have to agree. I'd add Ramon Ayala, is who I think my family grew up listening to. But you know what? I went to the Peso Pluma concert in Sacramento last year, and then to a Latino festival called La Onda Fest. And that was my first time going to Junior H was there. That was low-key scary.
Why? Because he was a sad boy, or what? Puro sad boy.
You were there too.
Yeah, I was.
We're trying to go again. What's up?
No, yeah. I don't know. It's just I think you have to be in a particular mood. Maybe because I didn't grow up listening to them, kind of to your point, Juan, too. Or I was just oh, okay. This is, it reached the target audience. I am not one of them, but everybody around me was, and that's great for them. And I kind of just found my way out.
Hey, she was there to the end, FYI, for clarification. She heard all the music.
That's crazy.
Pull out your phone and see what's on your playlist.
This is I'm holding you accountable.
We walked out together.
No, I was in the center because I had been watching the other sets. So I walked away from the group because there were a lot of kids around me with who were super into Junior H. So I kind of went out to the outside of the center of the mass. I was I'm okay.
So the kids are going to see Junior H, but not AOC. What's going on in the world?
Yeah.
No, I think for myself, I didn't grow up listening to corridos, but I worked at a nightclub that played corridos, and the first band that I ever heard was Banda Limon. and like they were great, and it was funny because like people were crying, and this was like early 2000s, and I was like, why are these people crying? Like it's just a man. But I never got that emotion, and then now as you listen to it, I'm like, oh, I understand why people cry to some of this music.
Yeah, my family grew up in Tijuana, so Los Tucanes de Tijuana. You know?
Hey.
La Chona.
Hey.
Yeah, so I think there's that. But the one thing we have to talk about is, the president and others, the American government as well. This president is targeting the corrido songs. But Mexican music is so diverse, and there's so many love songs out there, and there's so many songs about other parts of Mexico and other facets, and it's like, did you really need to launch a campaign, or could you have just funded more production of those kind of music, right? Like, the best poets out there are Mexican mariachi singers. You know what I'm saying?
I know. I'm not religious, but when you go up to outside of city centers and you start going to more rural areas, one of the proliferations of music is Christian music, and some of that Christian music is pretty catchy. And to me, it's no similar. I think if they were to take that sort of focus and be like, all right, we're gonna do narco corridos, but in a different, like, with a twist, right? How do you reduce the violence, perhaps, right? Maybe that's the point that they should be looking after, not necessarily trying to promote more holistic corridos.
Maybe hire like Kids Bop.
Kids Bop.
all of the Junior H and what is it, the Belicon song?
Yeah, there you go. Oh, that would be terrible. Never mind.
Yeah. No, but I don't know. I feel bad pitting like genres against each other. I've had conversations with my mom about this because like I'm a big Bad Bunny listener, and my family hates Bad Bunny. They're like, I don't know what that is. That's not real music. And then my mom plays like Ricardo, Montaner. I was like, girl, like, I was like, I don't know if this is for me. But I think everybody finds ways to express themselves with different genres, and I think that's the whole purpose of like music. It connects people, or it allows them to express themselves in ways that I don't think always words can. So I don't know. It's just going to be interesting to see how this, the impact that it has on the music industry.
Some of those old school bands and music were pretty raunchy, right? Like La Sonora Dinamita and No Te Metas Con Mi Cucu. Like, that is raunchy as hell.
Quinceañera staples right there.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Well, that's great conversation, and that's really, as we look into the international lens, wanting to jump at another subject that's truly international but 100% local, and going on. Earth Day was just celebrated on April 22nd, and a lot of folks did different activities that week or the weekend prior. Wanted to see, did anyone do anything? Did anyone do their own little action to celebrate Earth Day? Any activities? I know Juan is a specialist in this area, so
I work for the Earth every day.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it was pretty muted, I'd have to say, and it's because in our space there was a fear that there was going to be an executive order from the White House targeting nonprofit organizations, but specifically environmental organizations working on climate and diversity, basically. And so there was this fear for about a week and a half, 2 weeks of the rumors going back and forth about the targeting of these institutions. And so I think that a lot of folks, especially in the environmental side of things, are a little muted, it feels like. Not everyone, but it feels like a more mutedness on our side, simply because they don't want to attract attention to themselves for this administration. And so I think Earth Day was pretty muted. You saw Governor Newsom sort of doing something very low key with the first partner, I think he was out in the Central Valley celebrating Earth Day in previous years. He had, he would hold bigger, gatherings from folks. So, it's kind of sad to see, but if anything, this year and the next several years, we shouldn't just necessarily be dedicating one day to the earth. It should be every day. Latinos know that and understand that. But we need to be thinking more holistically about how we are protecting the natural spaces and creating more greening spaces around our communities, because the data is only getting worse, right? The climate is only getting worse. It's going to get hotter. It's going to get colder in some places. And the floods and the fires and the drought are going to continue to be exacerbated if we don't do anything about it. And so far, as a whole of humanity, it's pretty grim. So I try not to concentrate or look out into the future too much, and try to live in the present and enjoy every day of what we have. But we need to be doing a lot more.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. It was interesting is I was having a conversation a few years ago with a friend, and they told me, it was like, I feel like most of the people that care about climate change, it's like a white people issue, is what they said. And this was a Latino friend. And we were kind of like joking about it, but I'm like, it's interesting because I think a lot of our community does things in their day-to-day practice that are actually very environmentally friendly. Like I think about my abuelita that has like, the little daisy like crema containers. She uses them to store like leftovers. Like she'll give them to me to like, when she's giving me food when I come home, and like we have practices like that we don't even think about as being like climate conscious. And it's interesting because it is having really big impacts on our communities. Like Latino communities and low-income neighborhoods face the harshest environmental conditions as far as air pollution, as far as green space, water contamination. I think about like when I moved to Sacramento, how my access to green space increased exponentially than when I was living in South Central LA. And it's just like, that is something that all of our community should have, and we just don't, So, yeah, I really hope that, like, all of the stuff that's happening at the federal level doesn't stop the orgs that are really doing the work on the ground on behalf of our communities to increase, like, climate justice, because it's such a necessary space to be in.
Yeah. I feel like I'm hitting my señora era now, because I'm also trying to save my jars,
yeah,
or
same
saving
girl,
my
same.
topers. I'm like, those little things, but they go a long way, and just, they are practices that essentially make a big difference. But when you were talking about, green space, I was also thinking about that not too long ago. Someone from the IE just moved up, and they were saying how they were dealing with allergies and all this, and I'm like, damn, yeah, I think that's just the way that, we're not used to that. We don't got trees out there. We don't have trees out there.
Yeah,
and then we come up here and we're like, wow, like what could we be doing as community members to really support our environment? Or like, the tradition is like, oh, let's go plant a tree on Earth Day. But imagine that if we really did that in the communities that needed it.
Yeah,
right?
no.
Back to your job.
Yeah, back to my job. No, it is something that you can see the segregation of these communities, right? The same communities that lack access to food, lack access to healthcare, have increased violence and sometimes in the communities, are the same communities that have lack of access to green space. And in many ways, we have over a number of years have relegated ourselves and legislated that, right, through redlining, right? When you look at maps of redlined cities and communities, and you look at the urban and green canopy of these spaces, they pretty much overlap, like pretty congruently. And so we have legislated this. We have disinvested purposely in many communities across the state, across the nation. You can see the racism from from outer space. There are maps. Maybe now that the Trump administration is there now, no longer there, but NASA had taken photos of areas around the country, and you could see those red line cities, and you could put those maps overlaid there. And so to me, it has been by choice. Fortunately, there's organizations like ours trying to change that dynamic and create more of that space. So it's not just individually, right? Latinos know how to conserve and be environmentalists just by being themselves. But it really is. It takes the investment of the federal and state governments and local governments to invest in those type of initiatives to make sure that there's ample opportunity for that experience on the ground.
And let's not get it twisted. As someone who founded and created the Mesa Verde name, green is 100% what we're about. But I can't let us also think of Earth Day and not talk about the desert, because a lot of our folks live in the desert, and preservation of those spaces is really important, especially just to the species that live there. If you think about it, the Joshua tree takes so long for it to grow, and for that thing to be destroyed, for back when Trump was first in office, certain people were going to the national park and destroying Joshua trees. It took years, ridiculous amount of years for those trees to grow. And now people are just blatantly destroying them back in the day. And probably will still continue to happen. And so, there's even this movement here in California to preserve Chuckawalla down over and towards the Coachella Imperial area. And that's a desert area, right? And so, yes, green, very vibrant in the Earth saying, but in the Earth Day sayings. But we can't forget about the folks that live in the desert. California is a desert, right?
Yeah, and deserts actually, are a great sequester, right, of carbon. And, the best thing to do in desert areas is not disturb them. Once you start disturbing them, you start disturbing the sequestration value that they've created over millions of years. And so the best thing to, from an environmental and climate side of things is not to disturb the desert and keep it as it is intact, because it's already doing its job that it was supposed to do, and keeping the emissions and carbon sequestration down.
Well, let's continue to preserve the earth and do everything. I just want to quickly do a shout out to back home in Fullerton. We had some friends that put together an Earth Day event where kids were helping paint one of the murals at the park over in Treslow Park. And then we're also planting and gardening over there. And I think that's another way to uplift like how Latino communities utilize not just Earth Day, but the environment is beautifying the community. So there's gardening that's happening in that neighborhood in the Maple area in Fullerton, because people would just dump trash and stuff like that. And I know Trust for Public Land even has helped communities where people would dump trash in alleys and stuff, and they funded them to clean up that and beautify it. And that was another way to not only help the environment, but help create a space where folks where it was clean and there wasn't just random trash on the floor. But so shout out to Iggy. My nephews were able to participate. Thanks for doing that. Yeah, all kinds of sunflowers were out there, nopales, corn, all that. So it's really great. A lot going on over there.
That's awesome.
But that wasn't the only thing that we happened to celebrate in April. Tax Day was around the corner. Whether you celebrated or you didn't, it was tax season, and I think that's an interesting point for conversation for what we do in policy for many reasons. I think, there's a defense mechanism where, the Trump administration is trying to have ICE have access to IRS data, which has never happened and has had a long firewall between those two departments. But also, I think a lot of folks have uplifted different needs and wants from the community. So I know you all filed your taxes. I'm not going to ask you that question, but what are some things that, as you're filing your taxes or talking about money and, policy conversations, came up for you all?
Well, I think one of the things that I found interesting, I think the Latino Caucus posted the contributions of immigrants on their social media, which I think is a very, really well used, a good use of their platform, right? Because I feel like, especially all the rhetoric against immigrants, we forget about all of the ways in which we contribute to a system that in many ways ends up being weaponized against them. But just, one of the things that we do at Hope is always thinking about the economic power of our community and like how much we contribute to, just the economy. There was a report that came out recently by Dr. David Hayes Bautista over at UCLA called the Latina GDP Report, and Hope was invited to speak about that report a few weeks ago here in Sacramento. But it was showing how Latinas in particular are driving growth at every level. I think it said we had 1.3 trillion, our GDP, just the Latina GDP was in 2021, and how that's growing at a rate faster than literally any other demographic. So I think, I don't know, I think it makes me think about how much more we need to do to really elevate how much our community is powering the economy and, the U.S.
Yeah, I was also able to sit in on that. And what I took away from that is when Latinas are good, we're good as a state.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's very telling of us making it to be the fourth largest, economy out there.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to the comments that Newsom made on Fox about, us being a contributing state nationally. Will we get to a point where we don't pay, like with the feds, our fair share? Who knows? But I think that speaks to the point of, like, immigrants really do carry us as a state, as a nation. And, like, Chris and I have the opportunity to represent Inclusive Action for the City. And, they highlighted in one of their lawsuits, like, immigrants do pay taxes. And why is the IRS working with ICE to get information on them, right? Like, how are we going to grow as a nation if folks are fearful about submitting their taxes,
Mm-hmm.
right? How are we going to rely on that tax money or just overall, like, growth as a state? And we can have a larger conversation about how that's going to impact our budget, but how is that impacting our communities, our families, the people we know, like, there's no real incentive for them to be submitting their taxes if, ICE can come for them.
I also feel like it's just comedic at this point, the contradicting narratives around immigrants, because I think sometimes we're depicted as, like freeloaders who are taking away resources from other people, but then also the administration is like, let's go after all the people that are paying taxes into the system. And I was like, so you agree? And I was like, we do pay taxes, like we agree, you are contributing to this system. Yeah, it's a very interesting time, I think.
Yeah, for me, I think it's 2 points. On the short term is how ironic it is that California, who's seeking emergency relief for the wildfires that happened in LA, we still haven't gotten that funding that from the Newsom administration's request to the federal government for I think $47 billion for the fires down there, despite us being a state that is overwhelmingly creating a subsidy for the remainder of the country, especially states that don't have as big a tax base. Contributing into the federal government is one. And then the second one is the issue around just distrust, right? That's longer into the future, as you were talking, Carol, is this notion of targeting using the IRS to target individuals and creating fear among that population. What trust should people have later on, when hopefully this administration is no longer there, their willingness to trust the federal government to say, don't worry, we won't use this against you, right? Because there's no incentive. The trust has been broken in many ways in the community. So that's terrible, both for the community and for the federal purse, because those funds are not going to be there, right? And so beyond just the terribleness that the federal administration is holding and doing, it just does not bode well for society.
Yeah, and it goes back to the immigration part again, because why are people going to want to feel like they have a pathway to citizenship, or a path, like when folks say, oh, we did it the right way, or y'all need to go through the proper process that could take decades at this point, right? Why would someone, feel inclined to submit taxes to go into that pathway if it's not promised, or it could lead to their deportation?
Yeah, but I hear you, and definitely, Juan, I agree. I mean, if we're undermining trust in that system, and not just in like the tax system, but in all public systems that require community participation, and I think about it in terms of not even just immigrants who are paying taxes, but if like just that action is being now turned into a surveillance risk, and like we were, I'd hope we were engaging on conversations around students submitting their FAFSA and like what that information looks like, and how that could impact their own communities. So yeah, I think it's just this like weaponization of like fear and like what it means for like the weakening of the systems that like we rely on,
And while tax day, was upon us, California's going to see what those returns look like, and the governor's going to be releasing his May revise probably right after we release this podcast. So he's probably going to be thinking about us. We're going to be on top of his mind.
It's going to be bad.
I mean, that's what he says, but he did also just share we're the fourth largest economy of the world. So they keep on saying, well, we don't got a whole lot of cash. And it's like, but we do.
We just shouldn't pay the feds.
Yeah, and those are some of the conversations that are happening and with stakeholders, and which brings us kind of to our next topic. Really, there's a lot of conversations happening in Sacramento in the halls of the Capitol. Policy committees are on their way as we speak. They've been intense. A lot of great debate, a lot of new debate for freshman members, a topic we've been focusing on this year. And then I'll just kind of kick it off and say, aligning with what we just talked about, a lot of legislation that we've seen go through policy committees has been in response to Trump cutting something, the federal government failing us in some way, and California trying to protect folks. Want to see what are some of the themes and thoughts that are happening out there that you're paying attention to or that you've kind of come across in your work?
For me, it's cap and trade reauthorization. At first, I thought, that cap and trade discussion was a little bit on the quiet side, but because of the markets, both, nationally and also here in California, the fear of having the cap and trade market system sort of start to go downwards was something of an impetus for this administration and both the leadership in both houses to come out with a joint statement saying we want to do a reauthorization, essentially sending a market signal to folks saying that we are going to re-up this, and this is going to be in this year's legislative session. So while there's going to be a lot of debate over what does that look like, that's going to be a big bill on top of a lot of big other things that the legislature is going to have to tackle that I'm not only going to be participating on, but also how does that debate unfold?
Yeah, I think I was there on Tuesday when the line around the swing space was like nearing the Capitol. And I was like so pressed because I'm like, I'm gonna miss my bill coming up in committee. But I think there was also a part of me that felt like happy to see so many people up here. I mean, I grew up in Southern California in Orange County, and like had it not been for this job or, the career path that I chose, I would not have even known about Sacramento or what happens in these legislative meetings, or that there was an opportunity for public comment. So to see all of these people come up and be there, like, yes, I understand the logistical nightmare, but I also feel like that's what this whole process is about. And I think, with Hope, part of one of our core pillars is civic engagement, and like building up civic engagement so that our communities feel empowered to, engage on decisions that are being made about them. And I feel like that day was very much like that was on my mind. I think to our earlier conversation about the undermining of trust in the systems, I've been seeing a lot of legislation in those trends, like you said, Chris, looking at protecting systems of, safety nets like hospitals and schools and other areas where our communities are accessing services from fear, just creating safeguards against that and immigration raids and things like that. I know that's been a lot of what Hope has been engaging on as part of our support platform. But it's interesting to see how California is stepping in a time when I think a lot of our community feels like neglected or scared of what's happening at the federal level.
Yeah, so one thing I was thinking about when I seen those long lines, I was like, maybe it's just the elevator's not working, but I think it was actually people who care a lot about what's going on in Sacramento. And then I'll just say it's really eye-opening to hear the questions from members who aren't maybe on our side of politics and are asking questions like, oh, is that really an issue? Is this really coming up? And we're like, yes. And they're voting to support those things because they don't think it should happen. But it's like, but you voted for this person who's doing all this harm, and you weren't outspoken about that, and you didn't think this was going to happen. So it's really interesting because, there was a hearing, an education hearing, where a member was saying legislation that you've introduced to protect students at schools and their families from immigration enforcement is just a scare tactic. It's only to scare people. Mm-hmm. And literally the next day at the USD, there was two schools who had been approached, or at least it hit the news that immigration enforcement approached two campuses, and we're like, what scare tactic? We're really trying to protect our people out here in all facets.
Yeah, and there was a bill too that was in committee, and there were larger conversations about protecting kids when it came to immigration practices, and I just found it crazy to hear someone really ask these detailed questions and really be like, yeah, but what about the kids? And when you get a great response about like, yeah, this is literally to protect our kids for worst case scenario. If a parent does get deported, the parent should be involved in what happens to their kid after that, right? Celeste Rodriguez has a bill on that. And so I just found it so wild that even after they get a great response, you hear personal stories about how this can really protect our kids. Then you have staff be like, oh, well, that's members say, oh, well, that's very unfortunate, and then still vote against the bill when their focus on their argument was the child's safety. It's like, no, this is literally going to keep our kids safer for us, right? And I reflect on my own personal experience growing up. My mom had like plan A, B, and C, like what happened if I got deported, right? And I reflect on that now as an adult. All of her plans wouldn't have been possible because there's no legal standing for any of those plans, right? So I would have been with some random person because I didn't have a relative to go to or someone who could care for me or my brother. And so we really would be in very different places now should that have happened to my parents. And I'm thinking about all those kids who are in those situations now, and there could be legislation to protect them, or whether it's legislation about protecting them on school campuses or what happens worst case scenario. There's so many things that the legislature is working on this year, and I really hope that it shouldn't be a partisan thing. It's like we want our kids to be safe. We want our communities to be safe. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in many ways, it's the terrorization of, again, very basic infrastructure of society, right? Schools is one of those things that when you leave your kid to go to school, you want to know that they're safe. You want to know that they are going to come back home, right? And you don't have to want to be thinking about, what's going to happen, because that's freaking stressful. And so to me, it's that terrorization of basic society that the administration is creating. But I'm glad, at least within the LAUSD, that Carvalho, the Superintendent Carvalho, was, and he spoke about this, about his own experience being an immigrant, right? And why he saw and knows that how important that protection of, besides it being his duty, right, to protect kids and not anything bad happen to them, but also from his own experience, being able to empathize for what the type of fear ICE is creating in these communities, in school districts. So I'm glad he spoke up about it, and I hope he continues to speak out against it, and major kudos to him.
And while you were talking, another thing that the cross overlap is then what happens? Students don't show up to class, they don't go to schools, or schools don't get funded, right? And then we see this enrollment decline. Students aren't getting funded for the minutes the students are missing, and then that's like a whole other conversation about the overall success of a district or a school.
And a lot of people are probably listening. There's probably some people out there, I should say, who are listening to us and being like, well, all y'all do is just complain. Well, what are you doing about it? And aside from us lobbying and being advocates in the Capitol, there's other things that people do that we'll participate in. And bringing us to our next topic, where this recording is going to be released in May, around the first week of May, and May Day is a pivotal moment in many of our movements for workers, for immigrants, for many others. Carol and I, we're going to be going to participate in a May Day in Oakland. Would love to hear. Has anyone ever gone to a May Day? What is it like? Was it inspirational for you, or are you going to participate? Like Juan's like, I already did Earth Day, I can't do May Day.
I gotta go to sleep, man.
Yeah, the Earth don't sleep. Why should you sleep?
I don't think I'll be able to participate in May Day event, which you can call me out. That's okay. I have some family stuff come up that day, but it's been cool because I've been getting a lot of invites from different organizations that are hosting May Day events. I got an invitation from a May Day event that's happening in LA. It's cool to see that it's happening in Oakland. I think just bringing visibility to the issue. I see like a lot of organizations leveraging their social media platform for it. I know Hope does that, which I think is important because I think people just want to find community, and that's what this is about, is collective power. And I think that these kind of events bring visibility to that.
Yeah, I'm glad that there's a date, right, that can galvanize people together. But I got to say, we got to do more organizing as a whole, not just on May Day or on Earth Day or whatever the day is, right? There's got to be a lot more organizing movement. To your point, Carol, earlier on, the student movement needs to be more vibrant. And I'm not putting that on just the students, but it's really everyone. But I'd like to see more movements, more people speaking out, more leadership, not just from the typical, folks that we would think as leaders. Everyone's a leader in their community in some way or capacity. So I would say organize a lot more. We need more of the action overall, regardless of the issue that you want to take on. Do something.
We got to be telling our tios, our tias, the señoras on the block, on the corner, wherever you're going, because we really are all change makers when you think about it. I remember May Day when I was a kid, right? So I literally like a fourth grader, right? And my parents were like, oh, you're not going to go to school today. We're going to go to LA. And so I remember even being asked by like person from the news like, why'd you miss school today? And I was like, yeah, because we need immigration reform, we need amnesty, all this stuff. They're like, wow, your parents really prepped you for this one. I'm like, no, like, this is literally their lives. This is our livelihood, right? And so I love that May Day has continued since, you know, being that young little fourth grader and just seeing like our progress. But, you know, it's not enough progress. That's the problem. Like, it's great that we're organizing these days, but, you know, we haven't seen that return in investment, right? We've been investing a lot of days, a lot of years, but we're not getting to that deliverable, I guess, when you think about it.
Yeah. Not to complain again. But no, I agree. One of the things that we always elevate is like when we're thinking about workers is the Latina pay gap, you know, and Latinas earn, our data shows 44 cents for every dollar earned by a white non-Hispanic man, which translates over to over 1 million in lost income over a 40-year career. So just think about like, yes, we are making progress, but there's still a lot of work to do. And I am grateful that there are spaces where our community can come together to advocate for these changes, that there's also work being done, not just in terms of that collective action, but in terms of actual policy action that's being done around this. I know Senator Limon has an equal pay bill that she's championing this year, which Hope is excited to support. But I think it has to be both, right? And I think at its core is a reminder that like everybody can be an activist, like even if you can't take the day off of work because you can't afford to do that, you know, like reposting on social media, having a conversation, you know, about it, or talking to somebody else about the importance. Like there's little things that everybody can do to kind of keep moving the needle.
But I think it's really important to say that, you know, I'm not going to call you out, Maria, for not going to May Day, because Maria and Carol are putting a whole Latina Action Day together.
This is true.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and then Carol's going to be at 2. Maria got like all the organizing she got to do and everything. So tell us more about this Latina Action Day. It's happening what day in May? I think the recording should be out. So shout out to any of the new sisters that are going to be listening.
Yeah, no, we're super excited. So yes, I will also be in the thick of executing our conference. So we have a big policy and advocacy conference taking place on Tuesday, May 6th. We're expecting close to 400 people to join us for that, the majority of which, Juan, there we go, Juan will be there.
We love it.
Yeah, and I think the majority of the people that attend are people who are part of the Hope Network or connected or aligned with our mission. And I think it's a really great space to see community come together and like be like seeing the issues that we're talking about being elevated. I mean, as a women's nonprofit, a lot of the work that we do is looking at this kind of gender intersectional lens, and a lot of young women come to our conference. We're expecting close to like 80 high school students to come through, which we're really excited about. And for, I think, what we've seen historically is 80% of our attendees, it's their first time in Sacramento, like period. And their first time meeting with legislators. And I will say, I think there's like a really powerful moment when you see like 300 Latinas walking over to the Capitol. It's like chaotic and noisy and like fun. And I feel like it's exactly what, you know, civic engagement should look like. So we're really excited about it. We're going to be talking around issues in our education platform related to dual enrollment. We have this new report that came out looking at, we polled 400 Latinas and 400 African-American women looking at their childbirth experiences, a lot of which mentioned the importance of economic policies like childcare and like access to paid family leave as far as supporting that pathway. So we're really excited to look at kind of whole family health. And we have a panel related to economic mobility. So we're going to be looking at Latina entrepreneurship. So we're really excited. I think it's going to be great. I'm excited to see y'all there for all the, you know, millions of podcast followers that you have. You know, if they want to join us on Tuesday.
I don't got millions. I just got Newsom. Well, this comes to the part of the agenda where we're going to provide last words, knowing that this is going to be released in early May. We'll just go ahead and go this way and then end with me. But yeah, Maria, last words for those that are listening out there.
You know, we released a newsletter and we included a quote that I feel like I am living by recently. It's by Justice Sonia Sotomayor that says, you know, you can't change the world in big ways, but you can change it in small steps. And I find that I have to remind myself of that with like the state of everything that's happening and, you know, how much like of the themes that we were talking about today, like how helpless I think our community can feel. Like there's still progress happening, here in Sacramento, in our communities, in our local kind of, partners. So I find hope in that, and that there's still, no pun intended. There's a lot of good work being done, including by the folks in this room. So I'm grateful for that.
Damn, it's so hard to go after you, Maria.
Dang.
That was good.
It's not a competition.
No, yeah. Please show up to Latina Action Day, and if you can't make it this year, hopefully you make it next year, and say hi to Chris and I if you're going to Oakland for May Day. If you're in LA, that's great. Wherever you are, continue to protect our planet. I guess that's kind of what we're picking up from today, too. It's also tourist season, so, shout out to all the tourists out there. Yeah, I think we just have to continue to be loud, be vocal, bring in one person that we know who hasn't been, engaged or maybe doesn't feel like they have a voice, because they do. And just, as things start to feel a little partisan or divided, we should continue to find ways and spaces that we can come together to agree on, the common good.
I'll start or end rather with my favorite singer, one of my favorite singers, Chalino Sanchez. Ya se fueron las nieves de enero y llegaron las flores de mayo. All May.
Dang.
That should be our closing song.
Right?
Yeah.
Hey, we can't copyright. Even though he's my tío, I shouldn't be charged. But well, as someone, I know we talked about corridos, but as someone who listens to all these and dedications, I want to dedicate this podcast to folks who should be remembered. April 28th is Workers' Memorial Day, a day of remembrance for workers who have lost their lives at work-related accidents or work-related illnesses. Those people that I think about are sometimes could be mechanics, folks who work on our highways, that build our highways, our construction workers, farm workers who have had pesticides sprayed on them, garment workers who have been locked in factories. Their lives have not been lost on us, and I know a lot of them come from our communities. And so I want to dedicate this podcast to them and all the other hard workers out there who've gone through something horrible. We will always remember you, and you always will live in our lives with us. So thank you, everybody, for being on this podcast, and until next time.